All right, hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on somewhat of a staggered return, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, Season 6, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Now, as a huge sci-fi fan myself and an author, I've increasingly become fascinated by the subgenre called cyberpunk. In addition, I'm also drawn to the increasing number of female authors and female characters making up the cyberpunk world. And that's what we'll be discussing tonight as we speak with and about the women of cyberpunk. On our panel tonight is Sarah Jensen, a Canadian fiction writer, sci-fi enthusiast, and literary advocate. Sarah writes the Bubbles in Space series, a cyber noir techno thriller series featuring Bubble Marlow, a cyborg detective. Naturally, the series is loaded with wild characters, dark humor, and nonstop action. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, thank you.
All right. Also on our panel is ANNA MOCIKAT, the award-nominated, internationally published author of Behind Blue Eyes, Tales of the Shadow City series, and the MUC series. Before becoming a novelist, she graduated from film school and worked as a screenwriter and game writer. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
All right, God, I love that background. Awesome. All right, and rounding out our panel is Rosie Record, a pianist and film score composer who also is the author of Tronic, featuring her undercover agent Fiona Tronic, who operates in a dystopian future. Welcome, Rosie.
Hello, thank you.
All right. Okay, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so let's jump in. All right, so just so we're clear for the audience and even amongst ourselves, when we say cyberpunk, what are we talking about? Define cyberpunk for me. We'll start with Anna.
Oh my God. So first of all, we all love this question. We cyberpunk authors absolutely love and hate this question because there are a couple of cyberpunk groups on social media, and this question pops up like every 2 or 3 days, and then people start discussing it. And there are a lot of people who are, let's say, very conservative about this genre and see it like the genre defined in the 80s by William Gibson and others of his generation. And there are the younger generation of authors like us who have quite different opinions on what the genre is or should be. For me personally, cyberpunk, what makes cyberpunk different from other sci-fi genres is that it's usually in a dystopian, relatively close future, and it's a tech future. So the tech is a really dominant factor in cyberpunk. It can, but doesn't necessarily has to be social commentary. And this is where the Asian cyberpunk and the Western cyberpunk have differences. I personally follow the tradition of the Asian cyberpunk, like Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Ergo Proxy, and those kind of works, which are more tech-based and are more exploring and the question of what makes us human and where does the human stop and the machine start in a highly technological future, and that this explores the dark side of technology. So this is what it is for me personally, but I'm sure the other ladies have a little bit different opinions because everybody has their own definition of the genre.
Right. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with what Anna said. And I personally also look at the ways that technology can increase the divide between upper and lower classes, and you start looking at some of the economic disparities that can be enhanced by technology. And also some of the ways that underprivileged people can use technology to fight back and to fend for themselves. And I think a lot of what cyberpunk does is kind of look critically at the way that we use technology and all the various ways that it can Oh, it's kind of like the great equalizer, right? You have maybe big corporations or corrupt government systems that can use technology to oppress people. And you also have these rebels and these underdogs who can use technology to help better themselves in a corrupt and unequal world. And that's where that's kind of the line that mine takes, is more exploring those boundaries between the haves and the have-nots, and how the two uses of technology can kind of compare and contrast to each other.
Okay, Rosie?
I'm one of those, outliers. I think for me, cyberpunk, absolutely, technology is a huge part of it, but cyberpunk is a subgenre of sci-fi with a heavy, heavy, heavy dose of dystopian. And so dystopian genre really focuses on, yes, like the social aspect, but also cyberpunk specifically within the dystopian genre focuses on this kind of gritty underworld. So you see violence and sex and crime and this gritty underbelly that really highlights humanity and as Sarah mentioned, the social strata of people. For me, technology, of course, is a part of it because it's sci-fi and of course it's a part of it, but it's not the most important part of cyberpunk genre for me specifically.
All right, so as I was thinking about this and I was doing some homework and going back to some old books I had read, so cyberpunk, so they say, usually the combination of at least 5 core elements, right? Low life and high tech, dystopian future, hard-boiled noir, mega corporations, and the cyber world. Does that, generally speaking, sound about, it sounds pretty close to what we talked about, yes?
Kinda. I mean, it's again the Asian and particularly Japanese cyberpunk differs from that very much so, which is why some people say it's not actually cyberpunk, it's post-cyberpunk. And because it heavily focuses on actually the tech aspect. It can be a dystopia, but sometimes it is not. Sometimes the world is rather like a status quo, like in Ghost in a Shell, which is probably one of the most famous examples.
Sure.
It's not really a dystopia, and it's just the futuristic world which has become in a certain way, and the protagonists live in this world and basically don't know another world. So it's not that they try to change it or anything. They live with it, and they, well, in Ghost in a Shell, mostly it's about artificial intelligence and cyborgs and humans and what is the difference between them. But I agree that a lot of works are have those topics you just have mentioned.
So in general, it sounds like really the through line, if there is one, whether it's dystopia or not, is almost the sort of the pervasiveness and probably oppressiveness of technology, kind of systemically, right, up and down the stack, and how it impacts everyone, kind of whether you're well off or kind of, let's say, scrapping around at street level. You're kind of having to, technology has sort of invaded every aspect of life, and there's just kind of no getting around it. All right, so here's one question, and I thought about this for a bit, and it's one of those questions where, when we hear the word cyberpunk has been around for a while, and you sort of say, you kind of nod your head, and even if you can't consistently define it, it's kind of where they say, like that all the pornography, like I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. But here's the thing that occurred to me, is that you hear cyberpunk, but where does the punk element come into the cyberpunk? Rosie?
Sarah, do you want to talk about Bruce?
We get in trouble with this sometimes in our, we run a cyberpunk books group, and people really like to argue about whether or not new cyberpunk is punk enough, right? And this cyberpunk started as a literary kind of stylistic thing that William Gibson and others were doing, and then this almost cultural movement rose up around it, that really took on a lot of aspects of the punk, like the music scene, and this a bit some of the political anarchy, and this idea that that the people aren't going to be held down by corporations or government, and a lot of Western cyberpunk does deal with, it's almost like a re-envisioning of a lot of American like Wild West themes of like the underdog, or the the lone man against the big corporations or the big government, and a lot of those themes they came out of noir and hard-boiled detective stories from the 1930s and 40s. Really dealt with a lot of those themes as well, and I think that stylistically cyberpunk has kind of held on to that punk aesthetic, and it's become almost a caricature where people they like to look a certain way, and they like their cyberpunk to look punk. But thematically, I think a lot of what cyberpunk has kind of become its own fashion statement, which is pretty anti-punk. So it's really difficult to negotiate people's expectations for the genre, I think, because there was a lot of anti-capitalist sentiments and that kind of thing in early cyberpunk, and we certainly do look at it critically in newer cyberpunk as well. But as technology, as our current day becomes closer to what these cyberpunk realities were kind of envisioning in the 80s, we're having to adjust the way that we represent some of these things. And so I think the genre is shifting, and we're looking at things differently. And then the more Asian cyberpunk, like Anna's Behind Blue Eyes series and like Ghost in the Shell, they almost get these more metaphysical questions, like she said, about what it means to be human. And I think that is just as valid, if not more valid, than some of these more rebellious roots that the genre came from. But we're seeing cyberpunk expand into new areas now.
It sounds like, if I'm hearing it, that, and I'm just sort of, you said something interesting, sort of that idea of that kind of like that lone gunman, maybe anti-hero type, that kind of on some level, it's a little bit of, kind of fighting you're fighting the power, in a technologically oppressive world.
Yeah.
That's
where the original punk kind of
where it comes from.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So here's something I want to just kind of get right down to it. Right. So there's all sorts of sci-fi, and all three of you have really kind of narrowed your focus into this cyberpunk niche, and I kind of dabble in it myself a bit. But what about cyberpunk as opposed to any other kind of sci-fi? And you could argue that other sci-fi, military sci-fi, even space opera, has elements of cyberpunk in it, but is not sort of cyberpunk unto itself. What specifically, or what is it about cyberpunk that draws you into this niche? And I'll start with Rosie.
Cyberpunk, to me, I look at it as there's an aesthetic to the world that really draws me in, because it's a world drenched in neon, and like you said, very technologically focused. And then you have that dystopian angle where people are living in the seedy underbelly, and it's gritty and violent, all that aesthetic, that world, to me just really lended to the kind of message I wanted to push out through my book. To have something so dark and gritty like that really highlights humanity. One thing you'll notice is we're always going to be innovating and pushing forward with technology. We're always going to be going for the the electric car and going to Mars. We're always going to be pushing forward with technology, but humanity at its core will always remain the same. You know, technological advancements does not mean progressing our morality. So when you have these
you could argue the opposite is true.
You could. To me, I guess I have a bleak outlook on humanity, but you know, I feel like
You're not
even
the only one.
right, probably, but you're progressing, the world's progressing, society's progressing, and technology's progressing, but humanity at its core is just dark. And this cyberpunk aesthetic, I thought, was just, it was perfect to highlight humanity's failings. And that's why I have an anti-hero who struggles against, you know, her whole struggle is finding integrity of thought and action and moving towards a better future, right? So it's a good juxtaposition for character development, I guess.
So when I think about cyberpunk, and we've mentioned some of it before, and it just turns out that over the years I was sort of just dabbling in it myself. You know, I read, you know, Neuromancer and Burning Chrome 30 years ago, and just like I read Akira and others, you know, Blade Runner. You know, I've read a bunch of Philip K. Dick as well. For you, what do you consider that, are there go-to books? I mean, Ghost in the Shell, you mentioned, is another good one. Are there go-to authors, go-to books, go-to movies that you say, yes, that's my world? Anna?
Me? For me, it's actually not so much books. For me, it's very much anime and video games that makes my cyberpunk world. So I agree with everything with what Rosie said. That's also what draws me to the genre, certainly does. But for me, I love cyborgs. Cyborgs are my thing. I really love cyborgs. I fell in love with cyborgs when I saw Ghost in the Shell for the first time back in the 90s, and it totally blew my mind. And before that, I played a game, a very old game in the 90s. It's called a Syndicate, where you send cyborgs against each other and they fight each other and you can modify them and so on. The graphic looks totally crappy to today's standards, but it was a great game. So this was my first experience with cyborgs. Then came Ghost in the Shell, which still is my big love when it comes to cyberpunk. And my other big influence is the Deus Ex series, video game series, especially the two newer ones, which is Human Revolution and Mankind Divided. So this is absolutely the cyberpunk style I also have in my books. And
Sarah?
Yeah, well, so I kind of came at cyberpunk sideways from I have always been a big lover of the noir fiction. So right. Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and these old like pulp writers, right? Yep. And so I've read all of that, and then I really like there's this really, you know, the sparse prose is one aspect that I've always liked, but thematically, I like that exploration of how to, like Rosie said, that discovering your personal ethics and like a path of morality when you live in a corrupt world. And that's something that the old hard-boiled detective novels really explored a lot. And you know, in the 30s and 40s, they were kind of exploring ideas about whether or not like in the like kind of a critique of the American dream, right? Where we have this idea that if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you're doing well for yourself and you're making money, then therefore you must be a good and worthy person. And Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and these guys start kind of questioning whether or not you know, having money or having wealth actually does make you a good person, or if you have all this wealth and you use it for corrupt things, like they explore the criminal underground, right?
There's definitely a big noir influence in cyberpunk for sure. Kind of that, you know, powerful people who use their wealth and power often for their own selfish or sloppy or nefarious purposes, and it's left to the quote unquote little people who have to suffer and fight their way through it. And it seems that it really that's pervasive in cyberpunk. So what I want to ask is, and really why I wanted to do this panel in particular. So cyberpunk has been traditionally a bit more associated with male authors and male characters, but that seems to be changing, in my opinion. I think in that element for the better. So talk to me about the shift. Why the shift towards more female characters in cyberpunk and authors like yourselves writing cyberpunk. And I'll go with Rosie.
The shift. Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't know how drastic that shift actually is. I think in general, cyberpunk is or in sci-fi in general is a more male-dominated genre because of the tech focus and just the more science focused, while women are more focused on romance and YA. To be broad strokes, but I think the women who are drawn to this genre, drawn to cyberpunk, are they're rare breeds.
Yes.
back me up, Anna.
Well, you guys
is it a trend you're seeing? I'm not sure.
So
Yeah.
You basically have all of them on the show. I mean,
Yeah.
That's just it. Actually, a quick note to the folks who are watching. So I wanted to do this panel for a long time, and it took me a very long, I thought it'd be like, oh, let's do women in cyberpunk. And it took me months to kind of put this panel together because it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And it surprised me because I made an assumption. That assumption was incredibly wrong. But I'm glad that we got you here. So Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what Rosie said. I mean, we are really tiny minority in the cyberpunk genre, and I'm not sure if it's shifting really. It's not easy for us. I mean, I think there are more women than us, of course. Many write under gender neutral or male pen names, so and they don't put pictures of them on Amazon and so on, so readers think they're actually male. There are only a couple who are like us, openly female, and of course it's not easy. I mean, it is definitely a very difficult playing field for us because often readers don't take us seriously, and I think I don't want to say that's because, male, the majority of the audience is male. It's like 80% or something. And I don't want to say that male readers are sexist or something. It's rather more that often female authors, like Rosie said, they are more like into romance and young adult and that kind of books. And there are only a very few who take the genre seriously, and that's a little bit of prejudices we have to fight against, because there are only few of us who take it seriously and who write the same stuff as the guys do, whereas we have to compete with the romance novels with as Sarah always says, the blue-chested aliens. And Amazon is filled with those books. I don't want to say anything against those books.
I can tell you this: you have one author who's definitely look. I put this together for you, and just to show how serious I am. You see, I actually own. I own this, right?
Oh.
So you have my full-fledged support.
That's wonderful. That definitely,
yes.
Yeah. Way to go! More people should be like Russ.
All right, and Sarah, what about you? What's your take here?
On women in cyberpunk, I think we are slowly starting to see a shift in sci-fi as a broader category, where we're getting more female authors. Women have been reading sci-fi almost as much as men, I think, but we have been putting up with the fact that there just weren't a lot of great female characters for a long time, and it's only recently that we're starting to see more women writing female characters that other women identify with, and that aren't romance. And so, but cyberpunk has been a little bit slower, I think, to to make that shift, partly because it's just a smaller genre in general. It's a little bit more niche, and the fan base tends to be very, very, very loyal to those classic like proto-cyberpunk works, the Gibson, and like, I mean, they're up on a shrine and you cannot compete with that. So naturally, as you come in as a woman and with a female protagonist, you're automatically going against the grain. And there's a lot of, I don't want to say pushback, but there is a lot of hesitance to jump into a book with a female protagonist in a cyberpunk world, because people aren't used to it. And a lot of the cyberpunk groups they've been male dominated for a really long time, and there's just this whole culture that you have to kind of break into, and it can be very intimidating as a reader and as a creator to dive into those communities and say, hey, like, this is me and I'm writing cyberpunk too, or I like this stuff too, because a lot of people just want to tear you down. And for the most part, it's a nice community, but there is a very strong element of people who don't want change. And so we are fighting against that a little bit.
All right, so you're
I would like
you're being very cyberpunk with your cyberpunk.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to that, if I may. With the female protagonist, I think it's really funny and really interesting. If you look at cyberpunk, how it is presented, especially in social media, people love, I call it the cyborg fetish. People love images of half-naked cyborgs, female cyborgs, of course, and very sexualized images of women, cyberpunk women. Either they are cyborgs or they are like, I don't know, the rebels with the funny haircut and so on. This is extremely popular, and you would think that for those people, a female protagonist in a book should be nothing unusual, right? But it is. This is really strange that cyberpunk fans accept it in the visual world, like in images, or also like in anime with Ghost in a Shell and other heroes, heroines. But in books, they still would like to have their strong guy, and if there are female protagonists, then there should be the sidekick or the love interest. And I think for us, all three of us, we have strong female protagonists, and I think that's something very unusual in cyberpunk and something that still needs to be established.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that there are those out there who want to tear you down, but on this show, we build up. We don't do the tear down here.
Good.
All right. So let me ask you, how much when you write? Oh, actually, I won't. Before I do this, there's two questions I want to get into, which we will, and it's something that Rosie. So you said something interesting to me, and I promise you, I'm not trying to be salacious here, because I sort of, as an author, I travel in two worlds. I write science fiction, but I also write crime and mystery, and I also do a blend. And the two worlds, generally speaking, are the reader groups are very different. Sci-fi readers tend to be more open to crime and mystery. Crime and mystery readers have a very hard bias against sci-fi. And yet, the crime readers tend to be more, let's say, open to sort of like the dark, shadowy sexiness of storytelling. And some sci-fi readers are like, no, you can't, I'm too sensitive. You can't talk about those things. And it's kind of a really bizarre mix. But Rosie, you talked about how in cyberpunk, there's kind of there's a sexiness element to it. Is that something that you want, something that you expect, something that, how important or not is it to you within the cyberpunk world? And the reason that I asked this, and I tell you, is that I spoke on a panel about 2-3 years ago, and it was a crime panel. And I've spoken on many sci-fi panels, and I have to be very careful about what I say, because that audience tends to be a little bit more sensitive. And the panel that I was on was writing for the opposite gender. And so in my series, I have a female protagonist, and I was censoring myself on the panel. And the audience said, no, go, come on, talk about it. I was like, whoa, okay, I'm allowed to? You're not gonna cancel me if I say something bad here? And to me, if you're look, human beings are sexual creatures. It doesn't mean your book has to be highly sexualized, but it is a component of the human experience. So what's your take on it in terms of, is it something that you want in your cyberpunk? Do you expect it? Like, what role do you think, or do you want it to play within that world?
Oh, well, within my book, it plays a pretty big role. I personally like it. I think for me, cyberpunk is a beautiful hybrid of, like you said, like this crime where, you go to the dark shadows and it's a little bit sexy, and sci-fi, the hardcore logic, science, and tech, and it just marries the two into this fabulous little mixture of everything that's good. And so me personally, I would think a lot of female authors probably generally like this as well. As like you said, it's a human experience, and to mix that in with your character and within your story, it seems very natural. So I have several sex scenes. I like writing sex scenes. I like having that within my stories because I feel like it humanizes things and is a great opportunity for character development. And as far as the genre, I mean, I can't speak for everyone else, but I'm a huge fan of what's his name, Richard Morgan. Yeah, Richard Altered Carbon, and it's a huge proponent of that story, and I love it. It just makes it just gritty and real, and but I'm just speaking for myself, I
All right, right on. Anna, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. It's 100% was what Rosie says. I agree with that. And also for me, Richard Morgan is a big influence in my writing. And I was encouraged to write so many and so graphic sex scenes in my books because of him, because of how he does it. Because that for me was, sci-fi is often PG-13 and often very sterile, and for him in his books, it's, yeah, there is this grittiness and there is the sexiness, and that's something I wanted in my books too. And yes, there is a lot of sex, there is a lot of naked people doing things, and in book 2 there is a cyborg orgy. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on, and I like writing it.
So
and
I want to say this: I've done almost 60 shows and interviewed probably 100 or 120 people, and this is the first time the phrase cyborg orgy has ever been mentioned on the show. So that's a first.
Because I'm pretty sure that I don't know, I've never encountered a cyborg orgy before, so it might be it might be I'm the first one who actually wrote about it. But yeah, so there is a cyborg orgy and in a pool, and that's how it is. If someone doesn't like sex scenes, they probably shouldn't read my books, because there is a lot of bloody business, a lot of very graphic violence, a lot of action, and the other kind of action too. So I think that's definitely something
Sarah?
that belongs into cyberpunk.
How about you?
So I'm the outlier here. I don't have, I have a very, the world itself is very sexual, but I went, again, because I'm coming from a noir, I was going with the noir tropes, and a lot of those older books were really good at hinting about at sex and violence without ever actually having it on screen. And I even went so far as to not have any swearing in my books. And I utilized a lot of slang from 1930s noir, and kind of tweaked it and kind of created my own language. And that's something that weirdly a lot of people have actually said that they like about them. And I didn't really intend for it to be a thing, but now, once you start a book that way, you kind of have to go on with the rest of the series that way. And it's definitely not the books are pretty dark, but they're also funny. And they're kind of, I wouldn't say they're PG-13, thematically, they're definitely not. But yeah, no on-screen sex and no cursing. lots of blood and gore and death and that kind of stuff.
It's actually
So I don't know.
in the first book in my sci-fi Private Eye series, one of the comments that I got often was, and it was split. Half the readers said, "This is ridiculous. Every time this woman meets someone, they want to have sex with her, and this is not right. And this is this is not realistic. You're over sexualizing it." The other half, and it almost all came from women, and a lot from the LGBTQ community. They said, "Right on, Hardwick, go get some. This is great." You know,
it's two different audiences. So that's something you have to realize when you're writing. Like, you either do it or you don't, and you stay consistent, because there's not a lot of crossover between the two groups.
Right.
And like this is the only series that I'm going to do that way. I do typically write with more cursing and sex and that kind of thing. And so I don't know if I'm going to lose people as I move into other series. But yeah, like this one, I totally fucked up as far as Cyberpunk is concerned, like with not having enough sex and that. But I think that it works with the more noir style. So
for sure.
yeah, I don't know.
All right, so we're starting to run out of time. I got a couple more questions. So one, I want to go back for just a second, because it didn't even occur to me until, Anna, you've been talking about Ghost in the Shell often, and I wonder if the movie had been better received and was a bigger hit. I wonder if that would have changed the perception a little bit of the cyberpunk genre. Do you think that would have moved the needle a little bit? What do you think?
You mean the live action movie?
The live action.
So I personally, I love the live action movie. I love every Ghost in the Shell movie, and this one too. I think they did a great job. It looks fantastic, and I was very sad that it wasn't received better. I also think that Scarlett Johansson did a great job there, and the visuals, and of course the cyborgs look so good. Maybe, you know, if it would have been received better, Cyberpunk would have got also the female protagonist in Cyberpunk maybe would have been stronger now. I mean, we also had a Battle Angel, Alita, and that movie also pretty much went under the radar, unfortunately. Yeah. So we have two movies that have been clearly cyberpunk with a female protagonist, and they didn't really work. So maybe it also shows that the audience isn't ready for that kind of movie.
Or maybe they just weren't working off the right material, and maybe they should work off of your books. So which I'd be all for. All right, so I got another question, and then we're probably gonna get close. So as you write your series, are you, and I'll start since Anna, you were just going, are you more interested in plot or character?
So I am very much plot driven. I plot in advance. I'm not a pantser, I'm a plotter. So I have plotted out the 6 books of the series. And from the first book, I knew what would happen in the showdown in the last book. So this is how I usually work. But I come from screenwriting, from the movies. So that's how you learn how to write. You really are very much focused on plot, and you can't be a pantser when you write a screenplay. So this is where I'm coming from. Of course, the characters are as important to me, but the plot is what drives my story.
Rosie?
I'm the polar opposite. Yeah, character first, total pantser. The character drives everything. I changed elements in my story as I got to know my character more and more, and I wanted to what happened in the story to be authentic to the character that I created. So total opposite of Anna.
Yeah.
And I'm right in the middle. I'm an outliner. So I generally have kind of a roadmap for where I'm going. And the Bubbles in Space series is largely driven by the main character's development, as she's newly sober and is kind of just discovering who she is as she recovers from alcohol addiction. And so she's got a big overarching personal plot, but it's a very complicated, intricate plot that she works through as she's going through the character development. So they are really, I think, pretty balanced with my series. And again, with between plotting and pantsing, I have kind of a plot, and then I just improvise in between plot points. So
Sarah, you and I are cut from the same cloth. I'm exactly the same way. Okay, that was great, but now it's time for a special section of the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, some of which I created just for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are I, Cyborg, Quantum Leap, Stranger in a Strange Land, Music Lover, Cyber Yucks, Mirror Mirror, and Kick 'em in the Junk. All right, Sarah, you're up first. You ready? All right, here we go. All right, and you got Kick 'em in the Junk. All right.
junk.
Yes. So if you can travel to any point in time and space, and without repercussions, you can kick someone in the junk, who would it be?
Oh, you know, I'm gonna not have friends after this, but Isaac Asimov. I would kick his groping ass in the junk.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because he was a manhandling womanizer, and people just forget about that because he wrote.
I mean, but besides,
he was a perv.
Yeah, I heard that too. Yeah.
yes, fair enough. All right. One of the lords of sci-fi gets it right in the
Yeah,
know.
kick him in the junk.
All right. You ready, Rosie? You're up next. Cyber Yucks. All right, so this one is, all right, take any famous comedy TV series, past or present, and give it a cyberpunk spin.
Oh, come on, that's comedy series. How about Friends? That would be weird. Cyberpunk twist.
So who's the cyborg?
Joey.
Who has the cyber orgies? All right, how you doing?
Of course,
right.
yeah, him and all the actor cyborgs.
All right, there you go. All right, Anna, you ready?
Yeah.
All right, Stranger in a Strange Land. All right, so you are writing predominantly in cyberpunk. Are there any other genres you'd like to write in that you have not written in so far?
Probably space opera. I would like to write a space story at some point. I'm a big fan of all the space, shows like, of course, Star Trek and Star Wars. And one of my very favorites is The Expanse. So I would like to write something like The Expanse. That would be, that's definitely on my to-do list.
Well, I'm doing a panel on The Expanse in about 2 weeks. So
nice.
Yeah, so good. All right, so now we're up for our next section where we're going to pick your poison. You have choices A, B, and C. I'm not going to tell you what they are, and you're going to pick them randomly. All right, Anna, we're going to start with you. Pick A, B, or C.
C.
C. All right, C is, what is C? C is rejection letter. Okay, so what is this one? All right, so authors propose a novel, and unless they self-publish, which is increasingly common these days, they have to submit to a publisher. Even some of the biggest authors throughout history, such as Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, and others, were all initially rejected. And yet, all authors to varying degrees struggle with rejection. Talk to me about rejection as part of the writing business.
So how I deal with rejection, or how I would, I mean, so I have been, before I become self-published, I have been traditionally published. Back in Germany, I have been with a big publisher. So I actually was really lucky. So I didn't get the big rejection. I basically hit the jackpot. But of course, during my life, I had to deal with rejections many times and in many fields. And for me, I usually flip rejections off. I say, okay, screw you, and I move on, and I I don't let them bring me down. I know rejections suck. It's horrible to get them. No one likes them, but I think we shouldn't let them bring us down.
All right, very, very cyberpunk of you. All right, Sarah, you're up next. So you got A or B?
B.
B. Oh, all. Ooh, I like this one. All or nothing. This is a new one on our show. So
All right.
it's a little bit of a long question. So you just bear with me for just a minute. All right. So here's what's going to happen. It's either all or nothing or steady as she goes. So we're going to see where this bad boy takes us. I'm going to give you two options that will define the rest of your writing career. And you can only pick one. And here are the options. The first option is this. Your next book is an international bestseller. You win every award there is. You make tons of money. Your book gets made into a movie that wins the Academy Award for Best Picture. You can ride this success forever. You will always be that gal. However, every book you write after that, I'm talking every single one, is an absolute dumpster fire. Critically trashed and a commercial zero. You are called a washed up hack who can no longer even string together two cohesive sentences. Or you keep writing as you've always done. You are generally well respected, but there's not all that much money in it. If it were up to you, given these two choices, which career path do you pick? All or nothing, or steady as she goes?
You know, my husband would kill me for saying this because he has big hopes of retiring on my money writing. But I honestly, and it happens all the time where people get really famous and then nothing they ever do after that ever lives up to people's expectations, right? And I think I would be a lot more happy personally on the steady as she goes path.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so Rosie, so you got our last question. We're going to go to our advice column. All right, you and I are both in the writing business. So what's the best and worst writing advice someone ever gave you?
Oh, well, that's hard. You know, the best advice, I guess, would be my college professor saying he loved my work. He wrote a book, he published it, and it didn't go anywhere. But it was very true to him, and he loved it. And he said, just write a book that you would want to read. Write a book that's true to you. And I think a lot of people say you should write for your audience, and that's how you'll be successful. But I took to heart what he said, and I wrote a book for me that I could be proud of, that I could read in 20 years and be like, yeah, I wrote that, and it still holds up. So for me, that was good advice, but I think a lot of people would probably disagree with that. And then I guess the worst advice, don't get a publicist. Do not waste your money on a publicist. Yeah, they said, get a publicist and they'll help you out. They'll put out the word. They'll back you. They'll help you. Not worth the money. Yeah, there are other venues.
In general, I would probably agree, even though my day job, I actually work in PR. So.
Oh, sorry.
No, but for real estate, not for this. Okay, so we're going to take we got a few minutes. We're going to take a few questions. I got one here in the chat box. Do you think recent world events will create more interest in cyberpunk? Anyone want to take that one?
I think that in general, the world is going to become a lot more aware of some of the issues that cyberpunk deals with in terms of like our constant connection with technology and the ability of other people to surveil us, and how vulnerable we are to cyber attacks and that kind of thing. I think that's something that people are becoming more and more aware of, especially as Facebook talks about going to Meta and VR, and we're actually having to confront a lot of the ideas that were up until recently just fantasy. So in some ways, I think that people are going to become more interested in cyberpunk that way. But I also think that just sci-fi in general is adopting a lot of cyberpunk themes, and that we might see cyberpunk kind of dissolve into the general sci-fi genre and become less defined that way. So
All right, Anna?
I'm not sure, because often you hear, yeah, I don't want to read or hear anything about cyberpunk because we already live in a cyberpunk world. Maybe, you know, as our world is getting rougher by the day somehow, and so many people say like, okay, the good times are over and we are going straight into a dystopian future, and it might be that they rather want to read escapism, something that is really light and fun and just brings them away from reality, whereas cyberpunk is very much grounded in reality. Despite all the tech and everything, we really we are like a mirror to reality and to things that happen now, and we talk about those, putting them in the future. So it might be that actually is not so positive for our genre and for the success of it. I don't know.
Rosie, what do you think? You're kind of vaguely nodding.
Oh, well, yeah. I don't know that it will bring more readership, you know, like it being more representative of the reality that we're moving into. I don't know if people would, yeah, I want to read that, but I think the people who are reading cyberpunk will just feel a little bit even more paranoid, being like, wow, this is our potential future next, 5 to 10 years. And I think it'll just make our current readers even more worried.
Do you think, and this is kind of a follow-up question now, as you were talking, I was thinking on this. So just for example, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal today about how driverless trucks are making a difference in logistics. And look, let's just face it, my wife and I, we had this little joke the other day, there was a commercial on for like Alexa, Alexa play, whatever. And I keep telling my wife, we're never getting this. And it's because I don't like the fact that these things are listening to us. I hate it. And I refuse to have it in my house. I'm sure someday I will, because I won't be able to get away with it. But I'm wondering if, in a weird way, do you think cyberpunk as a subgenre is maybe even in danger of being phased out, only in that our real world is becoming so heavily tech infused? Every day it's getting more pervasive to the point where more fiction generally will just have cyber elements to it, because it's going to be more reflective of how we actually live, and being cyberpunk is not going to be so far removed. Do you think there's a danger in it actually being kind of forced out to the corners, just because it's going to become more normalized?
I mean, it will become contemporary literature.
Yeah.
Like
That's an interesting point. I don't know that it would be phased out, because we're constantly, like, we're always going to be moving forward. Elon Musk's always going to be doing something, and
sure.
the technology will, in our imaginations, will always be one step further than actuality and what we can, but I hear what you're saying, and I think on some level, yes, it will be integrated more and more into just normal fiction, because we are moving into that future, into that technological future, but our imaginations will always be ahead of reality.
All right, that was great. So we got a couple more minutes. I'm going to share my screen, and we've been talking about what the gals have. Now we're going to see. So bear with me for just 1 minute. I often screw this up, so if I get it wrong, I apologize. All right. So, all right, can you see this? Are you guys seeing this on my screen?
yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, Anna, dive in. What do we got? Tell everyone what we got here.
So this is Nephilim, the heroine of my Behind Blue Eyes series. Nephilim is a cyborg, and so contrary to a lot of cyberpunk, where it's like the underdogs who are the heroes of the story, in my case, Nephilim is an enforcer of the dystopian society. So they are like a elite cyborg squad that is sent out to against people who disagree with the system in any kind of way. And so she's one of those. She's a killer cyborg. She is ice cold. She is 60% machine. until she realizes that something is wrong with the world she's living in, and that maybe she has been fed a lot of lies, and that's where she starts her own journey and development. She's very badass, and she's also pretty sexy.
All right, right on. Okay, so Rosie, what do we got?
Fiona Tronic is essentially like an undercover NARC agent in California Next, which, but unlike working for the police, she works for the agency, which, you know, instead of the big evil corporations, it's essentially media manipulation. So we have false narratives, constantly. The airways are flooded with lies and just the false narratives that push people into certain positions of thinking and behaving. Fiona Tronic is essentially someone who has committed to the system, but that slowly dissolves over time, and she has to discover, you know, what is actually important in life, and if she's going to stand up to an integrity of thought and action.
All right.
She looks a little bit like you, actually.
There you go.
You know, that was a total accident. My husband commissioned the piece from an artist who never seen me, and he came back with this, and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's a nice story.
That worked
I don't know
out.
about that one. No, that's okay. All right. So Sarah, what do we got?
So this is Bubbles in Space, and it is a cyber noir detective series, or at least it starts that way, and it becomes a little bit more of like a techno thriller as the series goes on. Bubbles Marlow was forced into retirement from the Hollow City police force when she loses her arm in an accident. Because she stepped on some toes and the police chief wanted to get rid of her. And basically, she is a massive screw up. She's not very good at being a private eye. She's just recently gotten sober. She doesn't know how to use this cybernetic arm that she now has. And she's kind of a technophobe that's forced into having to deal with the technology and that kind of thing as part of her job as a detective. And she gets involved in a case that seems simple on the surface and ends up uncovering a big conspiracy that involves the police force and an anti-tech cult in the city, and things just go downhill from there for her. So
All right. So to everyone who's watching, we got three great books and series out there. So buy them all, support these authors. We need more like them. Spend your money where it's going to matter the most. All right. As for me, sticking with the cyberpunk theme, I'll encourage you to check out my Sci-Fi and War series featuring hard-boiled intergalactic private eye Angel Hardwick, part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, part Philip Marlowe. In both Crackle and Fire and Fractured Lives, Hardwick and her young protege, Eric Whistler, walk the streets of eternity, the galactic realm that oversees the design, construction, and maintenance of the universe. The cases take them on realm and off, not only challenging their ideas about how deep the corruption can go, but the very nature of the relationship between mentor and mentee. In Crackle and Fire, which is my most in Crackle and Fire, they are hired by an accountant who gets mixed up with dueling gangsters and a madman with galactic ambitions of his own. And in Fractured Lives, my most cyberpunk of the two, they are hired to find out if a college freshman who is also a galaxy design savant is suffering from a nervous breakdown or is the victim of an urban legend known as the Scarlet Raj. Crackle and Fire and Fractured Lives are available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press, while book 3 in the series will be out in September. All right, so that's our show. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the gang who's been out here. I want to thank Sarah and Rosie and Anna for coming on to the show. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I will see you all next week. So take care. Thanks a lot, gang.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
All right, great show.